Hello, I welcome you to this class. In this class, we are going to talk about adjectival clause, or what we call adjective clause. Adjective clause. In the previous class, we talked about clause, where we talked about the meaning of clause, the types of clause, as dependent clause and independent clause, and within the dependent clause we identified three types of dependent clause as noun dependent clause, adjectival dependent clause, and adverbial dependent clause. We also call these clauses noun clause, adjectival clause, and adjective clause. The three types of dependent clause: noun clause, as we discussed in the previous class, adjectival clause, and then adverbial clause. So these are the three types of dependent clause that we have. We've talked about noun clause in the previous lesson, and today we are talking about adjectival clause or adjective clause. We are going to look at the meaning of adjectival clause or adjective clause, and we are looking at the markers of adjectival clause, the markers or identifiers. That is what help us to identify the presence of adjectival clause or adjective clause in a sentence. And then we look at some examples of adjectival clause. Then before we talk about the function of adjectival clause in a sentence. Meaning, adjectival clause is just a clause that does the function of an adjective in a sentence. We defined a clause as a part of a sentence that contains a subject and a verb. When this group of words that contains a subject and a verb, they are performing the function of an adjective in a sentence, we call it an adjectival clause or adjective clause. When they are performing the function of a noun in a sentence, we call it a noun clause. And when they are performing the function of adverb in a sentence, we call it adverb or adverbial clause. Today we are looking at adjectival clause. So when they are working as adjective. So what is an adjective? An adjective is a word that qualifies a noun or a pronoun. A word that qualifies a noun or a pronoun, or a word that talks more thing about a noun or a pronoun. If you have the tall boy, we know immediately that we are talking about the boy. This is the main word in this sentence or in this phrase. Now this tall is just saying more things about the boy. It is giving us the nature of the boy in this phrase. That the boy is tall and not short. So if maybe you have many boys there, the only way we identify this one is that this one or this boy is tall, while maybe other boys are short. The black shoe is telling us about a shoe, but this particular one is black. The black shoe, maybe there are many shoes there, but this particular shoe is black. The white sandal, there are many sandals there, But the only way we can identify this one is that this sandal is white. The fat lady, maybe there are many ladies there, but the thing that will help us to identify this lady is that this lady is fat. So that is the function of adjective in a sentence. It qualifies a noun or a pronoun in a sentence. That is the same function that adjectival or adjective clause performs in a sentence. They also qualify a noun or a pronoun in a sentence. So we look at the markers of adjectival clause or adjective clause. What are the things that when we see them in a sentence, we begin to suspect the presence of adjectival clause? Markers. Now, when we see a part of a sentence that is highlighted or marked off, and it is starting with who, that, whose, when, whose, okay, whom, where, and where, and why, and why. When we see any of these words starting a part of a sentence that is marked off, then we begin to suspect the presence of adjectival clause. Note that these words, they also start noun clause as we discussed in the previous lesson, but I will tell you the difference, how we can identify when it is working as adjectival clause and when it is working as a noun clause. How we know it is this: for a noun clause, these words are coming immediately after a verb. When you see these markers coming immediately after a verb, then we are talking about, or we are suspecting, a noun clause. But when these markers are coming immediately after a noun, we are suspecting an adjectival clause. I said that when it is coming immediately after a verb, then we are suspecting a noun clause. And when it is coming immediately after a noun, then we are suspecting an adjectival or adjective clause. So this is the way to know when it is functioning as an adjectival clause and when it is functioning as a noun clause. We have some examples of adjectival clause here. Examples: when we have this sentence, the ball that Ebuka bought, the ball that Ebuka bought. Now, if this part of this sentence is marked off, that Ebuka bought, and we are asked to identify this part of the sentence. Now, first of all, we try to know whether this part of the sentence is a phrase or a clause. When you see a group of words, you first of all try to know whether the group of words is a phrase or a clause. The difference between a phrase and a clause is that a clause contains a verb, while phrase does not contain a verb. Now, looking at this highlighted part of the sentence, it contains a subject. A clause contains a subject and a verb. Now, it contains a subject, Ebuka, and contains a verb, bought. So we conclude that it is a clause. Now, which type of clause is this? It is that Ebuka bought. That Ebuka bought is a dependent clause. It cannot stand on its own. A dependent clause cannot stand on its own. It must need another thing to make the sentence complete. On its own, it cannot give a complete thought. That help cardboard, it is hanging. When you tell somebody that help cardboard, the person will be looking at you like a mad person because the sentence is not meaningful. So it is a dependent clause, and we know why it is a clause. It has a subject and it has a verb. Now, because it is a dependent clause, we have to identify which type of dependent clause it belongs to. We say that we have three types of dependent clause. We have noun clause or noun dependent clause. We have adjectival clause or adjectival dependent clause, and we have adverbial clause or adverbial dependent clause. These are the three types of dependent clause that we have. So which one is this? For us to know whether it is adjectival clause, we think about the markers of adjectival clause. This part of the sentence is starting with that. So we suspect adjectival clause. That is a marker for adjectival clause and also a marker for noun clause. So all these markers identified here, they are for both adjectival clause and noun clause. Now, their position in the sentence tells us whether they are functioning as a noun clause or adjectival clause. So we are now suspecting a noun clause and adjectival clause. So how do we conclude which one the part of the sentence is? This that is coming immediately after the word ball, and ball is a noun. So we conclude that this part of the sentence is an adjectival clause because an adjectival clause comes immediately after a noun in a sentence. Example 2. If you have the man who killed the rats, the man who killed the rats, and if this part of the sentence is marked off or highlighted, and we are asked to identify these parts of the sentence, now we first of all check whether it is a phrase or a clause like we did in the previous example. It has a verb, killed, and has a subject, rats. So we know that it is a clause. Now it has who, which is a marker for adjectival clause and also for noun clause. Now we check the position of this marker. Is it coming immediately after a verb or immediately after a noun? It is coming immediately after man, and man is a noun. So we conclude that this clause is an adjectival clause. Another example, if we have the student whose money lost, and if this part of the sentence is highlighted, whose money lost, and we are asked to identify this part of the sentence. Now again we ask ourselves, what kind of, is this thing a phrase or a clause? It is a clause because it has a subject and it has a noun. Then which type of clause is this? It is a dependent clause because this part of the sentence cannot stand on its own. Whose money lost? If you meet somebody and tell the person whose money lost, the person will think you are mad because it is not a meaningful sentence. It doesn't have a complete thought. So, being a dependent clause, we have to identify which type of dependent clause it is because we have three types of dependent clause: the noun clause, the adjectival clause, and the adverbial clause. Now, we look at the marker. The marker here is whose. Whose is part of the adjectival clause and also part of the noun clause. So which one is this? What will help us now is the position. Is this marker coming immediately after a verb or immediately after a noun? It is coming immediately after students, and students is a noun. So we conclude that this highlighted part of the sentence is an adjectival clause. So that is how we identify adjectival clause in a sentence. And functions of adjectival clause. An adjectival clause generally function as an adjective in the sentence. That means that an adjectival clause qualifies a noun or a pronoun in the sentence. For instance, in this sentence, this adjectival clause is qualifying this noun student. It's telling us more things about this student. The student whose money lost. If you have the student, the sentence is still okay. We still know what we are talking about. We're still talking about the student. But when we have whose money lost, it's giving us more insight about the student. Maybe there are many students there, but we are talking about the one that his money lost. In this example, the man who killed the rat, there are other men there, but the one we are talking about is the one that killed the rat. So if we leave it as the man, the sentence is still okay. But when we put who killed the rat, it tells us more things about the man, something that will help us to distinguish the man from other men that are there. The same thing with that help carport, the ball. Maybe there are many balls there, but that help carport helps us to distinguish this ball from other balls that are there. This one is the one that help car bought. So we can also conclude that when we remove an adjectival clause from the sentence will still have a meaningful thought. We still know what we are talking about when we remove the adjectival clause from the sentence. It is only that the quality of the noun will be lost, or we cannot distinguish the noun from the other nouns in the sentence, or we cannot know what actually is the unique feature of the noun. So that is the function. It qualifies a noun or a pronoun in a sentence, just like an adjective. That is the function of adjectival clause or adjective clause in a sentence.